start off episode 3 with Morticia and Gomez rectifying their mistake in forgetting Thing's birthday by giving him an executive manicure. In his case, it would be a full body massage. Morticia excusing her forgetfulness of that as a result of having to juggle Wednesday's bullshit with the gala's bullshit. Now, during my progress on writing up my analysis on episode 1 and 2, I did come across a video by Just Lance and Corbin, Respect, that has somewhat shaped my perspective regarding Wednesday going forward. How? The video goes over much of season 1 and how much it feels akin to the Addams Family show. Of course, my own analysis called into question how much this show aligns itself with it, as it feels the Addams Family shtick was painted on it, and only now has gotten some texture into season 2, but what Lance and Corbin elaborate is that the Addams Family in this show are particularly duplicitous, conceited, distrusting, and at times unkind to one another. He uses many examples of the behaviors of not only Wednesday but also the rest in the Addams Family movies as exemplary of the disconnect between it and how these characters act in the show. Now, once more, I'm not one to tout the adaptation argument when it comes to material like this, as I merely ask that the Wednesday show is at least consistent with itself, which it often isn't, and that Lance and Corbin aren't nearly as critical about the show in places where it should matter, but I do find it insightful that making the Addamses just as susceptible to normal human flaws means that they are no different to the normies in this show beyond their macabre aesthetic. And examples like with Morticia and Gomez having forgotten Thing's birthday, Gomez keeping secrets with Wednesday absent of his wife, and Morticia keeping secrets from Wednesday about what happened to her sister means that when characters like Dort, Bianca, Ajax, and Enid do the same, the only meaningful difference is that they aren't wearing black while they do so. And often the wedges that drive between the Addams Family dynamic in the show feel completely arbitrary, seeing as Wednesday shouldn't have any reason to hold back what she saw in her visions from Morticia if she was willing to be open with her last time. And we're going to get triangle-shaped wedges of conflict with Morticia, Wednesday, and her grandma no less. Speaking of, Morticia tells Gomez that she was suddenly compelled to call her mother up, but finds the process taxing and more than likely was unsuccessful in getting her a donor, figuring that Dort put her up to this. Laying it a bit thick there again, writers. Gomez tries to comfort her by trying to make the night a bit spicy, and they do some dancing while some robber breaks into the cottage. Oh man, who could this robber be? It just boggles the mind if I didn't know what kind of shoes Wednesday typically wears. Huh. Ironic that. But yes, Wednesday broke in to try to fetch Goody's book, expecting it to be somewhere where Morticia usually stashed it. Also, Morticia somehow had an epiphany that Wednesday was going to try this move, as not only does she out of scene suspect someone broke in, but also left a note for Wednesday if she did try to rob it. Yeah, I'm sure her bat-like hearing is going to be ignored for when convenient to the plot. Wednesday decides to bring up an anecdote to Morticia about how one of her favorite bedtime stories was the Salem witch trial transcripts, and analogizes that to her wanting her mother to hear her plea for the book. I don't normally criticize anecdotes like this as a more or less or morbidly humorous, but I do find this anecdote interesting as apparently to Wednesday, it was a surprise and shock to her what the Pilgrims did back in those days that she felt it of import to burn that statue back in season 1, yet apparently was comforted to sleep from the transcripts about them? Wednesday decides to open up a little bit to Morticia about what she saw in her visions, caked in with a little white lie that with her seeing crows surrounding a headstone regarding Enid, assumes that the one-eyed crow had to do with it. Again, I should emphasize, but nowhere in the vision does she see this one-eyed crow. And whether or not Wednesday believes it herself to be the connection, shouldn't she know that crows and cemeteries kind of go hand in hand in settings like this? Moreover, Morticia makes a good point that Wednesday's visions are all but unreliable and open to interpretation, something Wednesday should know more than anyone else, given how vague Goody's visions were to her back in season 1, but Wednesday believes she's mastered her craft, no she hasn't, and that they tell her exactly what she needs to see, except for when the visions didn't show you who that stalker was, or who killed Galpin either. Is Wednesday just taking the piss here because Mom won't give her back her Xbox? Morticia rightfully does not give Wednesday the book while Wednesday continues to chastise her for it, and that the matter isn't done with. and how that matter gets resolved will be saved for the end of episode 3. Additionally, Morticia does this on account of not wanting to fail Wednesday like her mother did to Ophelia, sprinkling more suspicions as to her culpability in being the avian. But we'll find out exactly who this avian is in episode 4, and it'll be a reveal that will surprise you, but also disappoint you the same. Into the next day at Ophelia Hall, Wednesday is attempting to crack Galpin's phone while Enid is trying to crack her menagerie of clothes for the school camping trip. And yes, this too is the school flavor that surrounds this episode, and conveniently enough, near Wednesday's investigation no less. Enid wants Wednesday to involve herself with her new wolf pack, Wednesday countering that she's avoided HX as much as she claims Wednesday has, with Enid saying that she didn't expect her relationship with Bruno to flourish so quickly. Yeah, that doesn't excuse Enid to not call it quits with Ajax in the 6 fucking months between the summer break and now, just because she decided to get wet lips with Bruno. Jesus Christ, I fucking hate teenagers. Wednesday pulls a diversion on Enid by having her leave Ophelia Hall to look for some kind of bathing suit, while iterating the thing that her vision of Enid dying stays between them. And Agnes, as she just happened to be invisible the whole time Wednesday and Enid were here to hear all this, and while yes, Agnes is Wednesday's superfan, but her invisibility will be utilized for her to be wherever the plot needs her to be, regardless if it makes sense for her to be there, as I proclaimed. Agnes insists on wanting to be her loyal servant to Wednesday, who shoots down the request on behalf of Thing, already filling that slot nicely. Remember, Thing doesn't like being treated like a servant, being essentially told by Wednesday he exists purely for her benefit. Agnes isn't going to take no for an answer so easily, which, at a certain point, shouldn't Wednesday just have her get committed to an insane asylum? Like, does Wednesday think Agnes wouldn't kill someone just to get her approval? Or what other crazy shit Agnes may do on her behalf? Regardless, Wednesday has a funeral to catch, and we'll get to that too in a moment. Back at Eugene's shed, Slurp had presumably returned here of his own volition, chain and all, so that Eugene and Pugsley can continue to feed him more of that mystery meat. They also see that Slurp has been healing, as not only has some of his hair follicles returned, but that his brain is rapidly expanding back inside his skull. Of course, the mystery meat isn't palatable enough for Slurp, who wants to eat the two, whom Pugsley seems very defensive on the notion that Slurp would try to harm anyone to Eugene. Furthermore, he says that Slurp wouldn't have no reason to leave because of the getup he has, which makes no sense from the prior scene in which Eugene tells Pugsley that Slurp escaped, so not sure why Pugsley is lying to Eugene this way. And of course, Slurp does make a reach for Eugene before Pugsley shocks him into a corner. Eugene correctly states that it's quite irresponsible to hold this walking corpse around, especially as they too plan to leave for said camping trip. Pugsley doesn't want to fib about Slurp on the chance they'll kill him or worse, but does reassure Eugene that he has a means of which to keep watch on Slurp while they're out. We're going to find out exactly what Pugsley means by that soon, but do keep in note that for every moment that Pugsley continues to take cover for this zombie is another potential body that he'll be responsible for, and oh boy, is there plenty more where that comes from regarding what Slurp gets up to in episode 4. Now, there has been a noticeable absence of Jericho, the town, as a setting in Wednesday Season 2 so far, and only in Galpin's funeral do we even revisit this area again. Guess so much for having the weather vane be the town's bicycle, but I imagine this was done to put more emphasis on Nevermore as a function, or perhaps a metaphorical through line with Dort putting more emphasis on the outcast as the show putting more emphasis on the same. Oddly enough, Galpin's funeral is lapsed with much save for Dr. Fairburn and Santiago in attendance, and even they seem to be only here out of obligation and nothing else. Like, wouldn't Galpin at the very least have a few of his extended family visit, maybe other friends of his abroad? Or hell, even some of the other police officers who don't believe he covered up his son's murder spree? Was Galpin so disrespectful of his station that he might as well have been forgotten after what happened in Season 1? Wednesday surprises Dr. Fairburn and Santiago to her presence, as she believes that killers have a tendency to check up around at their recent kill. Santiago mentions that she heard that Wednesday visited Tyler at Willow Hill, and that doing so was a fool's errand given Tyler's erratic nature. She specifically states that it doesn't take years of police work to figure that, and what does Wednesday have to say in response? This.
It wasn't years of police work that exposed Tyler as a hide, it was me.
Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
Call me J.K. Rowling, because my next book entry is going to be called Harry Potter and the Audacity of This Bitch. Yeah, Wednesday, you figured it out, and not your stupid, bullshit contrived visions figured it out for you after being led astray and falsely accusing several other people prior to that revelation. More to the point, Santiago was merely stating the obvious and not trying to flaunt her police credentials at you, seeing as your feeble visit to Tyler did amount to nothing in the end. So, can you stop trying to be a try-hardy, holier-than-thou bitch for 5 minutes, please? Wednesday then asked Dr. Fairburn if Galpin ever did meet Tyler at Willow Hill, to which Dr. Fairburn said only once, and that said meeting was unpleasant as Tyler immediately hid it out and tried to rip through his cell to get to his father. With her being honest about that, Wednesday also informs Fairburn that she believes the killer is an avian and wants to know if any have been committed at Willow Hill, and Fairburn also assures her that none are present at this moment. Again, a dead end for Wednesday on this matter for now. We get a new setting for Wednesday Season 2 in the Inn at Apple Hollow, and its relevance to the rest of the show is only minuscule at that. Its only purpose to be here now is to finally redress the Morning Song situation in episode 5 of season 1, as Bianca has come here to siren song a room out for her mother as she lays low. Why? Well, the compound that said communion took place got raided by the feds, and that Gideon, who was Gabrielle's betrothed, was implicated by them through Bianca during her summer break. Now, what was immediately peculiar to me about their entire conversation through all of this is that Gabrielle has seemingly went from a malicious, backbiting mother to this helpless victim puppeteer to do Gideon's dirty work. Keep in mind, Gabrielle supposedly knew how Bianca wormed her way into Nevermore, name change and all, and was not at all perturbed about hanging that onto her conscience. But now, she's apparently seen the error of her ways and that all culpability falls on this random dude who we've yet to know personally? Also, given that Bianca had agreed to her mother's wishes on the condition that it would be out of her life for good, now that Morning Song is basically no more, Gabrielle doesn't have anything else to hold against her as a bargaining chip. So why is Bianca still helping her? Just because she's her mother? Because Gabrielle, being her mother, didn't stop Bianca from supposedly running away from her and the entire organization back in season 1. So what's her motivation for helping her beyond this point? Back at Nevermore, Wednesday resorts to desperate measures on account of her investigation drying up by asking Agnes how she was able to tap into Galpin's phone. Apparently, Agnes was able to achieve this by having a fellow shapeshifter student pose as Galpin to bypass his face scan feature. So does that mean that when Agnes was threatening Wednesday back in episode 2, that this same student was just a hairpin away? And if Agnes had already broken into Galpin's phone this way, why didn't she change the settings to make it easier for her to use? And moreover, if she was giving Wednesday his phone as a olive branch, why wouldn't she have mentioned that at any point until now? I guess padding is the only excuse this show can surmise. Agnes also gives Wednesday some stuff she smuggled out of Galpin's house before the cops arrive. Guess she also wants to ride with Wednesday on catching felonies ad nauseum. That may or may not help with her investigation. As Wednesday shoos them off, she overhears the voicemail Bradbury gave to Galpin before getting pecked to death, surmising that whatever this bullpen is may be some offshoot lodge or house. She scours through the box of evidence to find a picture of one with the bullpen written on the back along with the relative location of it. More parallels between Season 1 and 2 are brought forth, as Episode 3 of Season 2 also gives us a very detailed view of a map of Jericho and beyond that somewhat corresponds with my rendition of locales in Jericho back in Season 1. Conveniently enough, with the rendition of this map, the location of the bullpen just so happens to be a stone's throw away from Camp Jericho, where said camping trip just so happens to take place. A factor that Wednesday and Thing couldn't have possibly known prior to this, so lucky for them it panned out in their favor. As Dort toots his horn and rounds up the students for the camping trip, we get some more quibbling with drama between Enid and Ajax that flounders like a dead fish in a drought. Ajax apparently isn't so keen on that Enid has the hots for Bruno, or maybe he's just coping to himself that it isn't the worst case scenario, and their exchanges will be resolved in equally confusing and contrived manner shortly. As to overstate just how dangerous Nevermore and their students can get, Enid gets bailed out of this awkward convo by Miss Capri, who is definitely concerned about the school planning this trip on a full moon. Which, honestly, even accounting for that wouldn't do much to account for all the other ridiculously dangerous and or powerful abilities students have, including, but not limited to, someone impersonating Miss Capri for shits and giggles. But I appreciate the minuscule effort the show tries to gaslight you into thinking it has. Wednesday joins in her new campsite getup. I honestly tire of her Sherlock Holmes-esque outfit, as to assure she is deductive as he, and Enid is giddy at the prospect of her joining the trip. So does that mean that this camping trip is voluntary given this comment of hers? Because even Dort says that he was surprised by her last minute addition to the trip. So who exactly is keeping watch of the students who don't go to this camping trip then? Also, it's not exactly a detail worth discussing, but the place they go to is only 10 miles away from Nevermore, and this is assuming that the 25-minute walk from Nevermore to Jericho is roughly a mile between them. So not sure why the show treats this excursion as much farther than what it actually is. If that's what you call a camping trip, then me going to Crater Lake must have been traveling cross-country. Wednesday tells Enid that her only reason to join in on the trip is purely for her investigation, chiming Agnes to appear when the plot needs her to, as to her helpfulness in assisting Wednesday in this investigation, but also to drive a wedge between Wednesday and Enid. Even Enid asserts that Wednesday shouldn't be trusting her on account of Agnes's attempt on her life. Remember, that's something Wednesday is really concerned about. And Wednesday says that Agnes is only an amateur at best, which does not at all coincide with why Enid is saying this, as though Wednesday is as dense as a doornail when she's supposed to be extremely perceptive, at least described by the show anyway. Even weirder than that, but Agnes takes what Wednesday says as a low blow to her ego, despite her claims that she didn't want to be Wednesday's next murder case. So if anything, Enid is even more justified in what she's saying by how Agnes responded to it. There's a small montage of the buses arriving at Camp Jericho, and as the students unload the goods, we get a scene that has barely even married the subplot with Pugsley with Wednesday's plot, as Wednesday is prying Pugsley about what he has stowed in his coffin. As though it wasn't fucking obvious, Pugsley has indeed brought Slurp with him, coffin and all, to this camp to keep watch on him. And he makes a really poor alibi that Wednesday should see right through, but thankfully doesn't for the plot. This is one of many instances where calling back to that Just Lance and Corbin video pay off, as I feel if the Adamses were more in line with their movie depictions, Pugsley would have been immediately upfront with Wednesday with what he had stowed, and that Wednesday wouldn't take issue with it either, maybe even conspiring with him on it purely out of morbid curiosity. Because here, I simultaneously cannot buy that Pugsley would lie to Wednesday about something like this, nor buy that Wednesday would have believed it either beyond some mild skepticism. To Wednesday and Pugsley's surprise, their parents have also joined in on the festivities, although more than likely the reasons are purely to keep watch on Wednesday by Morticia's call, even if Wednesday as of current can't really get into further trouble past this point. Gomez also wants to join in with his son, but he shoots down that offer on needing to keep Slurp a secret to him and Eugene only, and again, the compounding interference Pugsley uses to cover for Slurp will reach its breaking point soon. Speaking of, Eugene sees Pugsley setting up some bottle rockets as a contingency for Slurp escaping, much to Eugene's shock that Pugsley's resolution for Slurp was to haul his ass to the camp with the rest of the students, instead of, I don't know, burying his ass 6 feet deep under a pile of rocks, maybe? But I guess because the show said that Pugsley is stupid, that he'll equally do stupid things when the plot needs him to do. So he too can sit in the circle with Claptrap, Vasquez, and Adam in tow. Gomez announces himself to Eugene and Pugsley, whom the two have to try to cover for their secret to Gomez in comedically inept ways, while Gomez yet again lays it on thick that if they get into trouble, that they should leave no trace. Honestly, I was half expecting that Gomez knew that they were storing a zombie in their tent and was subtly nudging them that way, but nope, he's very clearly clueless, as we'll get into regarding his interaction with Slurp later. More regarding Gomez, he tries to get into Morticia's pants as they've settled in their tent, but Morticia is still hung up by Wednesday in her plea to fetch that book. Gomez is so rattled by Morticia being this despondent that he wants to cave and give Wednesday the book, but Morticia assures him that they both need to be strong for Wednesday even in the thick of it. Now, here is an example of what I expect out of an Addams family dynamic. Dort makes his public announcement as to what doing this camping trip means for Nevermore and the Outcast as a whole, while letting more of his subtle racism towards normies peek out during his chanting of there being none. He gets interrupted by one Ron Kruger, although for my own humor, I'm going to call him Sergeant Stuckup, as he has presumably booked this venue for his cadets, their Boy Scouts, in advance a while ago. Both he and Dort dabble on the matter and discovered that they had accidentally gotten double booked by the same owner, but regardless of that, Kruger wants the Outcasts to leave so that they can do their Ultimate Wilderness Challenge. Wednesday, the exact kind of person who doesn't want to lead, mind you, takes exception to what Sergeant Stuckup says and offers that the two groups fight for the spot at Camp Jericho. And boy howdy, the word fight is putting a lot of work into just how much more death-defying Nevermore and its students have become that it makes the fucking Poe Cup look safe in comparison. And how? Well, Dort and Kruger explain the details of this challenge as it's basically an inverse capture the flag where one team has to grab their Zephyr from the opposing team defending it and put it on the podium at the top of the lookout tower before the other team does. Kruger specifically states that
The attackers are allowed to recapture the Zephyr by any means necessary.
and however you want to interpret by any means necessary can extend as far as killing someone to get to that Zephyr, as far as I'm fucking concerned. Not to mention, does it feel like the cadets are just a teensy bit outmatched by the fucking Outcast by the rules of this challenge? At least I would assume so, but there is something that will balance the scales for the cadets, but not in the way you think later. But nevertheless, even if the cadets have the rigor to brave the outdoors, I don't think any amount of tree hugging is going to save you from getting mauled by werewolf claws, stoned to death, or sirened into stupor if that contingency wasn't established. The Outcasts and the cadets have 5 minutes to assemble their teams, Bianca coyfully stating that the Nightshades have been reinstated as a result of this. Ajax adds on to the joke by saying that only Nightshades are allowed to be part of the team, although he may be saying this to sling some daggers Enid and Bruno's way, getting looks of scorn by everyone else for doing so. What's odd about this arrangement is that Dort isn't the one deciding the teams when Kruger very clearly is commanding his troops like the stuck-up sergeant he is, and now you know why I call him that, which might have added some drama that Dort may have picked unwisely who to lead his entourage to grab the Zephyr, that Wednesday would have had to intervene in some way. Before the teams assume the position, Wednesday has a bit of monologuing about how she only came here to inspect the bullpen and that she wasn't going to let these cadets somehow compromise that mission, apparently forgetting that she issued the challenge to Kruger in the first place? I mean, even going beyond how Kruger would have even forced these students to leave the camp had she not issued that challenge, why couldn't she still scope out that cabin and cloak it as her leaving the camp like everyone else? Sergeant Stuckup assembles his squad to mount the perimeter while giving them a helping hand by way of some unsanctioned military supplies to fight back against the Outcasts. And when I first heard this, I thought it would be hilariously awful if these military supplies were claymores, C4, assault rifles, or anything lethal, but no, it amounts to little more than some gas masks and some tear gas. So I guess even the show considered the imbalance between the cadets and Outcasts in this scenario, but couldn't think of anything more that would also make the premise of this challenge more life-threatening. The starter cap goes off and the teams assemble their positions, and immediately inconsistencies with the matter of this challenge are noted, as despite the teams comprising of 2 groups of 5, the Outcast defense is only Kent, the dude who tried to drown Wednesday and Enid back in Season 1, and Ajax, while the offense comprises of Eugene, Wednesday, Enid, Bruno, and Bianca. There is no explanation for this discrepancy beyond the fact the show realized that if there were any more outcasts defending the Zephyr, the cadets would be wholly outmatched to retrieve it. Vindicating this, the cadets arrive at their Zephyr and one takes aim with a bow. Imagine if he actually attempted to kill Ajax here, before the other has him aim for his beanie so he can inadvertently stone Kent. This succeeds and the cadets effortlessly subdue Ajax while firing the flare to signal the retrieval of the Zephyr. Meanwhile, Bianca and Wednesday take point behind a rock near their Zephyr, with Bianca stating to Wednesday that she can't siren the cadets defending it as a result of them wearing headphones too. Which, I'm not sure if that means that you have to completely block out all sound in your ears to be immune to compulsion, or just muffle it enough that it won't have an effect, but that also means that Xavier could have had some earplugs handy on him if he really felt at odds with Bianca back in Season 1, but oh well, guess he'll remain a Season 1 staple only. Wednesday takes command because, as we all know, she was the person who will burn a pedestal down if you put her on it, by having things signal Enid and Bruno to charge the cadets' position, and yes, that's about as far as the tactics with that go, as opposed to Enid and Bruno flanking in different directions, trying to get some verticality with the trees. Nope, just heedlessly charge on like always. The cadets easily stop them by throwing some tear gas their way while equipping their gas masks to nullify the effects, prompting Wednesday to signal air support by way of Eugene, calling his horde of bees to bite the cadets into a panic. Yes, the tear gas is apparently so effective at humanoid beings, yet apparently has no effect on insects, despite the fact that tear gas is not too far removed from a fumigant if it has this compound in it. So this is about on the level of inconsistency as Wednesday throwing those piranhas in a freshwater, chlorine-filled pool. Also humorous is that the cadets are so rattled by the bees stinging them that one of them take off their mask for some reason, as though that would help and not compound the problem, but whatever. Wednesday is able to walk through the tear gas because supposedly it doesn't have enough of an effect on her to garnish the same reaction to retrieve their Zephyr, Bianca excitedly shooting the flare to signal that. Pugsley announces the obvious, but curiously says that Wednesday retrieved the Zephyr, something he couldn't possibly know even if Wednesday is taking part in it, unless he's using the royal we in Wednesday in this instance. Wednesday and the cadet run to the lookout tower, but Wednesday and her team are comically behind as the cadet has already reached the base of the lookout tower by the time they are overseeing some cliff face from it. Wednesday's plan to make the distance is to shoot some kind of grapple gun with a rope to hook onto part of the lookout tower and zipline herself all the way to the lookout tower in record time. Yeah, don't ask me how or what she tied the other end of this zipline to in the time it would take to even ensure it wouldn't snap or snag on the way down, as it's off screen the entire time it happens. Also, even with Wednesday doing this, she would have lost if not for the cadet deciding to celebrate too early with the Zephyr just a few feet away from the podium. Lucky for her that he did, though, so she could kick him down and plant the Zephyr on the podium before them. And yes, the Outcasts win, but only barely, with several handicaps along the way in-universe and out-of-universe, making the whole affair of this challenge feel contrived for tension. And seeing as this episode is largely about this camping trip, unfortunate parallels will be drawn to how Pugsley and Wednesday dealt with their camping trip back in Addams Family Values. The main takeaway of the events at that camping trip was that Wednesday and Pugsley saw fit to subvert the entire nature of how that camping trip was going, to the point that they made the camp managers believe that they had been converted to their way of thinking before the other shoe drops on them in comical and devastating fashion. But here, Wednesday isn't trying to subvert anything, and if anything, is playing exactly by the rules of the engagement here. More importantly, Wednesday and Pugsley weren't just getting at the trip for some selfish vainglory, but were actually trying to save their parents from the main antagonist of that movie. Whereas with this, Wednesday has no reason to issue this challenge, nor does it, or would it contravene her objective of scoping out that cabin. It feels as though Wednesday is only doing this challenge to stroke her ego, at least if we are to assume she doesn't care about being a flagpole for someone else's cause. So again, she is essentially no different from any other outcast and any other normie beyond her wearing black. Sergeant Stuckup eats into his cadets for failing to win the challenge, so bruised his ego that he plans to retake the camp tonight whether or not the outcasts had won it by the rules preordained. The importance of how he goes about it and who he happens to run into will once again implicate Pugsley soon. Wednesday is planning her route to scope out the cabin, but gets paused by Dort, who, similarly to Weems, is appreciative of her sticking up for the outcasts, whether he or Wednesday can even understand why they did so. Again, Wednesday having inadvertently tripped her way into a leadership role is noted here, although whether this is going to actually amount to something rather than having some listomania from those fangirls is another matter altogether. Day turns to night as Miss Capri and the students do a campfire sing-along while Wednesday is investigating the cabin in one of the few instances of non-monologue transition shots as it cuts between Wednesday looking for clues and Ajax growing more agitated by Enid fawning over Bruno. Not much is developed here beyond ribbing some more cover songs by way of Creedence Clearwater Revival, which seems out of place for a soothing campfire song that became one of many anthems for the Vietnam War. I suppose it's better than when Season 1 did an orchestral version of Nothing Else Matters by Metallica, one of my favorite songs from them, the bastards. As for the cabin, Wednesday finds some kind of mirror with Polaroids of the Galpin family out on the trips and notes something peeking behind it. In, she discovers a collage of obituaries of various outcasts who died in a 15-year period, all of which had died at Willow Hill. Also noteworthy is that the inscription Lois is plastered at the top, with Wednesday taking away that this Lois is responsible for the recent murders and what will be Enid's too. Apparently, it doesn't seem at all suspicious to Wednesday that this Lois is in all caps as to actually be an acronym and not a name, but that distinction will be important regarding episode 4. Once more, Wednesday attempts to tap into these obituaries, but is once more cut off from her psychic visions, blaming the absence of Goody's book as the reason. I know this is being a dead horse, but Wednesday already was losing her psychic ability even when she had that book, so where is the through line that that book was her link to that? Wednesday has had enough of Morticia impeding her progress, so she'll find a more pointed means of which to get that book back, while grabbing some pieces of evidence before leaving the bullpen. The campfire song ends with Morticia and Dort having some more conversation about whether she was able to get her mother on board for the donor list, with Morticia saying that she was a no call for that. Yeah, Dort should have figured that even with Bianca compelling her to make that call, that she would have had to compel her mother to even agree to those terms in the first place, but regardless, Dort insists that perhaps a personal visit to Nevermore may pique her interest to donate. Enid and Bruno walk around the woods, with Bruno inviting Enid to some werewolf skinny dipping, before Ajax butts in and finally confronts Enid on her unceremoniously breaking up with him. As I surmised, Ajax didn't want to believe she left him for Bruno, and brings up much of my pointed arguments as to why Enid didn't make it more than clear they were apart. Ajax brings up the anecdote and analogy Enid made at Uriah's Heap back in Season 1 as a singer to Enid that cross-species relationship just can't work out. And it's hard not to feel a bit righteous that Enid is getting flamed this way, not only for her doing it, but for being hypocritical and believing Ajax had done so back in Season 1. But, as much as I would selfishly praise Ajax for finding a spine, this scene has sneakily served two purposes. Because, in earshot to all of this, a group of cadets had overheard this messy breakup such that they feel personally bad for Ajax, and that this empathy will cause doubt in them to carry through with Sergeant Stuckup's plot. Yes, much like with Lucas discovering that outcasts have human interests back in Season 1 of Episode 4, also, so much for him ever getting a word in edgewise, this too is a silly revelation for these cadets to make. At Morticia's camp, she gets accosted by Wednesday, who demands for the last time her mother give back Goody's book willingly. Of course, Morticia refuses, prompting Wednesday to challenge Morticia to a abuelo a ciegas for that book. We can get into the matter of what this duel is, but Morticia is initially obstinate about taking up the duel on part of assuming that Wednesday's grandmother put her up to this. A wedge that will creep up more so into Episode 4, but as far as Episode 3 is concerned, Morticia says that Wednesday had been talking to Grandma, but when or why is anyone's guess. Wednesday says it's about the principle of the matter, and not about drama between her mother's mother and her mother, which really puts a pin on how, when Morticia needs to, it's just as stuck up and conceited as Wednesday can be, Guess it wasn't enough to have one parent and child being at odds with one another, seeing as Tyler and Gulpin aren't around to do so. Morticia agrees to this duel, with Gomez thrilled as ever about it while he announces he's taking a shower in one of the stalls. Again, this detail is surprisingly important for later. Meanwhile, Kruger is ready to mount his cadets into taking the camp like a thief in the night, but gets some pushback by the very same cadets who felt bad for Ajax, collectively saying that this isn't a good idea and that the outcasts won fair and square. My brother in Christ, there aren't any rules to this challenge beyond how many people can take part. So, what is fair and square in the purview of this challenge exactly? It really is the Poke Cup all over again. Kruger isn't remotely convinced, and nevertheless has his cadets move into perimeter while having his own squad following him into one of the tents, as they supposedly plan to tie up the outcasts while they're asleep. And do you want to take a wild fucking guess what the first tent Kruger and his boys go to first? Pugsley's, as Kruger trips the alarm system that was for Slurp, and Slurp, supposedly out of his restraints, sucks Sergeant Stuck-Up's skull to satiate himself, to the screams of his cadets in witness to this. Count number 2 of blood being on Pugsley's hands, but it's also incredibly contrived that Kruger chose this tent first out of any, and that Slurp hadn't been trapped in his coffin to facilitate this, yet also didn't feel compelled to leave it until very soon after he killed Kruger. Also, I get that Kruger was a bit of a dick, but it's also weird how this whole scene is played off as humorous because of Kruger's incompetency, contrary to his boisterous attitude. Like, do the writers want me convinced that he deserved death? Wednesday and Morticia prep their Abuelo a Ciegas, but apparently the Netflix subtitles fucked that up, as Morticia describes it as a El Duelo a Ciegas, which roughly translates to the blindfold duel. As the means of this challenge involved the two of them attempting to strike some kind of glass heart pin on their person to win. As to why this challenge wasn't more simply getting any kind of strike on the person like a normal fencing match is beyond me, because if there was a accidental fatal blow struck on someone, wouldn't that have the same result? Even if we go by the logic of striking the glass heart, that means that any thrusts would also be fatal to the person wielding it, unless the attacker had enough restraint to know how far to strike the heart. The reason I'm putting emphasis on the fatality of this duel is that neither Wednesday nor Morticia want to kill the other. At least I hope so. So any kind of error or mistake involving this duel would be catastrophic as a result. The deal with this duel is that if Wednesday wins, Morticia must give Wednesday back the book, whereas if Morticia wins, she will burn it, rendering it useless to anyone. Although, if Morticia had no interest to give Wednesday the book in the first place, and clearly had issues with its application as one, not sure why she didn't already burn it, but the reason for her not to do so right now will be laid in place regarding episode 4. Regardless, they put on their blindfolds and the duel is on. Pugsley and Eugene return to their camp to find Kruger dead and Slurp missing, both frantic about their implication in killing someone as a result of harboring the zombie. Once again, they say this all within presence of Agnes, who supposedly was just chilling around this tent the whole night based on Wednesday's wishes to keep watch on Pugsley, and wasn't perturbed by Kruger getting killed or Slurp being in the tent either, so the writers once again expect me to buy that just because she can turn invisible, that she can be wherever the plot needs her to. Agnes insists on helping Eugene and Pugsley find the zombie, and Eugene initially turns down on the offer because of his previous scrape with scoping out a monster the last time he did so. Not to mention doing so bereft of Wednesday telling him not to back in season 1, but gets dragged by Pugsley regardless. Because this portion of episode 3 cuts between Wednesday and Morticia duking it out and other scenes, I'll discuss the duel as one whole piece save for one transition between them. Slurp wanders around and finds some hatchets, compelled to some kind of bathroom stall, the same stall of which Gomez announced he's taken a bath in. Initially, Slurp tries to break into the shower to Gomez's showerine, and humorously Gomez mistakes Slurp as Morticia becoming violently horny for him. The problem with him believing that is that he would also have to believe that Morticia got done with her duel so quickly, and that lit a fire in her loins to go pursue him in this manner. Eventually, Gomez discovers that Slurp was fiending for him, but gets saved by Pugsley and co, who zaps him clear through the other side of the stall back outside. This gets the attention of the camp, who, similarly to their cowardice back in Season 1, apparently forgot that they have supernatural powers, that they all run in terror of this zombie with a hatchet. I guess I appreciate the consistency of that plot beat, if for the wrong reasons. Also, you'd figured at this point that Pugsley, Eugene, and or Agnes would continue to chase after Slurp since he isn't too far from them, but nope, he somehow wanders his way to what will be the duel between Wednesday and Morticia. Speaking of, the two duke it out with some clever word play between them, as Wednesday says that her mother taught her all that she knows before Morticia flings it back that she didn't teach her all that she knows before the duel commences. In another surprising amount of restraint on the writers, Morticia does win her duel and breaks the glass hard on Wednesday, much to her disappointment. Wednesday then throws her saber at what Morticia likely thought was for her, but instead was thrown at Slurp's head, who is pinned to a tree. I guess as a way to show that even in frustration of her mother, Wednesday still looks out for her. But I imagine if Slurp wasn't there for Wednesday to save Morticia, she likely would have gone for a kill shot of Morticia, but who knows. And the next scene plays out similarly to the padded monologue scene of episode 3 of season 1, as an ambulance and some cop cars disarm the situation at the camp, Kruger's body being carried to the salute of his comrades, Slurp being interred at what will be Willow Hill, much to Pugsley's disappointment, and Wednesday finding herself once more at a dead end on her investigation with the avian, making their physical presence known to her from a distance. Now, regardless that Slurp is completely out of Pugsley's hands at this stage of the show, Slurp being where he is, will still be on Pugsley's conscience for whatever he gets up to, and he gets up to a lot regarding episode 4, don't worry. So I hope Pugsley, or even the show, recognizes that instead of downplay or outright dismiss it. As for Wednesday, she set up her own collage of what she gathered at the bullpen while still trying to square the circle that this Lois figure has something to do with Enid dying, and it becomes less convincing the more times she tries to say it. Her only main lead is that Willow Hill has something to do with it, and will be largely involved regarding episode 4 and whatever nonsense transpires in it too. The final scene of episode 3 has Dr. Fairburn and her assistant, Judy, discuss the matter of a new transfer to Willow Hill, one that is incredibly dangerous that they need to keep a constant vigil over. Initially, you would assume this was Slurp, seeing as he too gets transferred here, but much to my shock and dismay, it's none other than Laurel Gates as a teaser for what episode 4 unfolds. Yes, despite Fairburn telling Wednesday that she made it so Laurel and Tyler were as far apart from each other, they will be reunited in some fashion regarding episode 4 for reasons that are as nonsensical as it is dangerous to do so. But we can get to that when we get there. And that was episode 3, as much as I'd expect out of the Wednesday show as far as I'm concerned, and has a litany of problems similarly to episode 3 of season 1, surprisingly enough. A lot of padding, a lot of inconsistent motivations, the usual holier-than-thou behavior I've come to expect of Wednesday, draped with the parallel of a camping trip sequence made inferior compared to the camping trip shenanigans of the movie it borrows so much from. There is little in the way of praise for this episode, yet also much else I can be properly frustrated by. Good thing too, because all that frustration will be levied for episode 4 of season 2. Be forewarned, fair viewer, but episode 4 of season 2 is an especially rough episode for me to dive into, arguably the third worst episode in the entirety of the Wednesday show, pitting it against episodes 7 and 8 of season 1. So, do tighten your asshole for the mental raping this show unleashes upon you. Starting off episode 4, we tune to Willow Hill and Laurel as she's escorted to Fairburn's office to discuss the matter of her negotiating with Tyler to rehab. Laurel makes a quip that she got useful info from Fairburn's book about grooming Tyler, despite the fact that Fairburn hadn't ever come to blows with a Hyde to even part any info about them, and also scoffs at the notion that Willow Hill is here to rehabilitate anyone. Why? Well, Laurel alludes to whispers about there being secret experiments taking place at Willow Hill, something Fairburn also sarcastically dismisses as well. This detail is incredibly important for what little clues Wednesday currently has for later, and is yet another case of the writers laying it on thick, the foreshadowing. Fairburn wants to know if Laurel is going to cooperate, and Laurel tries to bargain a permanent transfer to Willow Hill as a patient. for reasons I'm sure aren't entirely motivated by wanting to uncage her monster, and Fairburn rejects that bargain on account of that being a decision the jury would need to make. Yeah, not sure why Laurel even thought she was in a position to be making deals in the first place, and there's plenty more she'll try to make with Fairburn that to Fairburn would be ridiculous to accept. Laurel eventually relents on the condition that she at least get to see Tyler face to face, and Fairburn makes the questionable call to do so. Even more absurd than that, when they arrive at Tyler's cell, she directs the bodyguard to unchain Laurel from her binds so that they can be more closely reunited. On top of how potentially dangerous Tyler can be to anyone, even someone he's submissive to. But how does Fairburn know that Laurel isn't going to take any opportunity she can to free her slave to unleash upon them? But I guess Fairburn read the script, because when Tyler reaches his hand out to Laurel, he instead chokeholds her in his hide form through the reinforced bars. The security guard makes the correct call to immediately engage with the shock collar, but Fairburn has him stand down on the logic that Laurel would be killed if he did so. How exactly? Wouldn't Tyler's hands not only shrink but retract from where he's currently grabbed her from if the guard engaged his collar? But whatever, Laurel plays as she'll find a way to get him out of here, a line that should make Fairburn absolutely reconsider even entertaining Laurel to be here, and Tyler throws her across the wall in resentful agreement of that plea. Well, good thing she didn't break her skull at this point, or else everything else that transpires in episode 4 wouldn't happen, or better yet, had broken her neck from him choking her too long either. But if she did die, that would make episode 4 only somewhat more palatable than it is now. Back to what Wednesday is getting up to, she's digging through some funerary urns before we get promptly and abruptly introduced to Grandmama, or Hester, a surprise that also perks up Wednesday in a way that is honestly quite disturbing for her to smile so wide like this. Wednesday basically catches up on Hester as to why she's here and what her investigation involves, once again white lying that this investigation has to do with her visions of Enid dying, and that had she had her psychic visions, she would have already solved this mystery. That's a incredibly funny line for Wednesday to say, because that's basically the show acknowledging that she needs her fucking plot device to even be as perceptive and deductive as she assumes she is, and that had she not lost it right when the plot had thickened, none of what has happened would be happening. Hester helps Wednesday with her investigation by having them smell the contents of the urn. Wednesday catches traces of various animals, but the main discrepancy is that the urns don't contain anything human in them. This prompts the one-eyed crow, who was witness to all of this, swoop in and steal all of the evidence Wednesday had from the bullpen regarding the obituaries. The way this is even shot is incredibly hilarious too, not for just how incompetent Wednesday was to have her only lead be swept up this way, but why she even had her evidence on her beyond giving it to Hester on the off chance she would be here as well, including the way she stands for a few seconds, baffled by the crow even doing that, no less. So, with Wednesday once again at no leads, she returns to the cemetery with Hester and instructs her to buy this cemetery to see who had authorized cremations, so she knows who to look for next. Hester asks why she would do something like that, and Wednesday says she can stick it to Hester's daughter that she'll be part of the family business, seeing as the only thing this show knows how to do well is to make another mother and daughter drama double over like this. I mean, it's frankly odd that Wednesday finds it easy to convince Hester this, yet simultaneously it's a headache for Morticia to convince her to donate to Nevermore. Hell, ask Wednesday to ask her if she's so fucking convincing. Wednesday monologues her way into Ophelia Hall, the one-eyed crow keeping a more persistent vigil on Wednesday as she does so, barging in on Enid and Bruno being yet again stuck at first base despite what was put in front of the door handle. Imagine if Wednesday just walked in on them raw-dogging each other? I guess Enid isn't exactly too hung up about walking out on Ajax that way, and was more preoccupied with walking into Bruno's cock, the harlot. Also, yet again, Agnes just so happens to have been here the whole time these two were lovemaking as well. Guess good thing there wasn't a visible pool of water from her fingering herself the entire time they were doing so. Anyhow, Agnes has been doing busy work for Wednesday, including but not limited to collecting her mail, to which Wednesday opens and jots along the pages. Of course, the letter was about the novel she so desperately wanted to save, and the letter states that Wednesday is uncooperative to deal with that, and that they were going to drop her as a writer. Agnes apologizes about her being dropped out, to which Wednesday retorts,
Why? I'd rather no one read my novel than make a compromise.
Wow! Who wrote this?
So if that was the stance you're going to take, Wednesday, then tell me, why the fuck was it such a big deal for you to save that manuscript back in episode 1? Christ, I get more sick and tired of Wednesday always needing to have the last word in everything because it results in completely contradictory bullshit like this to occur. Wednesday tells Agnes that the avian is hot on their investigation and that Willow Hill is the only avenue they have left to discover. And Wednesday knows just the kind of person to get inside Willow Hill to assist. Who, you might ask? Well, it's none other than Uncle Fester, the always useful exposition piece for Wednesday, at least as far as his usefulness was concerned back in episode 7 of season 1. And wouldn't you fucking believe it, he is used yet again for that same expository piece. How? Well, Wednesday has him meet at Iago Tower, and I guess we just have to suppose that not only does Uncle Fester know of this tower, but also knows how to get in that tower, since he knows whatever the fucking writers need him to know, but he also knows that Morticia's sister was held at Willow Hill upon Wednesday requesting that he finds a means to intern himself there. Shit, Wednesday, you might as well ask him if he's ever been with an avian, because God knows he somehow knows some valuable anecdote important to your investigation too. Like, seriously, is this all Uncle Fester is to these writers now? Also, in keeping with the inexplicable presence of Agnes, she was also here too to get shocked by Uncle Fester, who somehow suspected that some apparition was out and about the place. Of course, why Agnes was even invisible if she was merely coming here to give Wednesday blueprints of Willow Hill is a question the writers are sure not to answer, since it's more comedically punchy that her hair is frazzled from getting a jolt. Wednesday wants Fester to find a Lois in the facility, and that whatever antics he gets up to can't be tied back to her, especially regarding Fairburn. Now, the show has yet to establish any schism between Wednesday and Fairburn past this point, so not sure why Wednesday even needs to contrive this stunt instead of just cloaking another visitation of Tyler as a means to dig into Willow Hill, or why it would matter that Fairburn could tie Fester's motivations to Wednesday's. It would only make sense for Wednesday to do this if she believed Fairburn had something to do with the deaths of Galpin and Bradbury, something she only teased the idea of during that funeral procession in episode 3. As for Uncle Fester, his plans to get himself interred at Willow Hill is through the inn at Apple Hollow, where he will buy out a suite and make a ruckus of the place until the police deal with him in kind. The importance of Fester doing it at this inn will involve the other subplot regarding Gabrielle and her suite, as once the police do arrive, they decide to sweep room by room for him for some reason. Despite that Fester has only seen fit to terrorize a room he rented out, and hasn't left from it, this is a strange decision by the police to do that, and it only seems to be done so that Gabrielle can be had by the police, which causes another question as to the rest of the residents at this inn not wondering why this room is always vacated. Like, did Bianca siren every person who came past this inn so as not to cause any curiosity about the room that Gabrielle was at? And furthermore, why didn't Bianca or Gabrielle pay for the room in the first place if it was going to be such a hassle for Bianca to have this pan out the way that it did? Santiago eventually comes into the suite Fester stocked up and apprehends him in the bath in equally comical fashion to the choice of song playing, as we cut to her interrogating Fester about the contents they found on him. As to authenticate his own insanity, Fester takes a peek at a cactus plant and eats it raw in front of the police, making it a compelling reason for Santiago to call up Fairburn to have him institutionalized at Willow Hill. As for Gabrielle, she's also being questioned at Police HQ as to her squatting at that inn, and having done so for a month so far. This amount of time that Gabrielle has squatted at that inn will also be important regarding the timing of things, but will be better saved for episode 5. But I also find it odd that Gabrielle hasn't seen fit to use her own siren song to get out of this mess, but perhaps this is to be in line with what she said about her siren song drying up back in season 1. We go back to Nevermore, where the matter involving Pugsley and Eugene's cover-up of Slurp is only meagerly addressed, as presumably they've been beset with community service by way of packing some envelopes for the upcoming gala, including Ajax and Bianca in tow as punishment. Orloff and Dort come to greet them, with Ajax wondering why he was punished for Eugene and Pugsley's actions, whom Dort answers that question by way of Bianca wanting to deal with a personal matter involving her mother as she's blowing up her phone with texts. Notably, Dort is considerably more incensed than he normally is upon hearing that Bianca wants to skirt her responsibilities, stating that he now has to tell the board that they've missed their first fundraising goal as a result of missing out on that top donor, before bringing it back to Ajax that leaders have to take the fall for other people's screw-ups as his answer. Again, sometimes good writing really does shine out of the pockets of crap you have to wade through to get there, although there is logistical issues with the matter of them packing envelopes as Gabrielle being apprehended by the police just so happened to occur shortly before Bianca was tasked with doing this so that Bianca can't bail her out, along with the fact that Eugene and Pugsley likely should be charged with 2 accounts of involuntary manslaughter and not simply community service for their actions. At the Rose Cottage, once more Wednesday chastises Morticia about her plan to burn Goody's book before confronting her on the matter of Ophelia being interred at Willow Hill and why. Morticia says that that was a decision her mother made after a freakout from Ophelia, despite Morticia's pleas for her not to, on the logic that Ophelia's problems were psychic, not mental. Isn't that basically the same thing regarding these powers? And wasn't Morticia's concern about Wednesday was that her powers could lead to madness, at least when describing Ophelia's ambition regarding her powers? Also, regarding Ophelia, up to this point, Morticia made it seem as though Ophelia was completely deliberate about her intentions to exploit her powers for her own ends, but now is arguing that her spasm was involuntary? Which is it, Morticia? Of course, no catfight between mother and daughter would be complete without grandmother and mother, as Hester makes her appearance to give Wednesday the good news regarding the cemetery she bought for her. Predictably, this does anger Morticia, while Wednesday has the most shit-eating grin about being made a part of the family business before shooing Wednesday to have personal words with Hester. Also, remember how Morticia has bat-like hearing, at least according to Wednesday? Yep, that gets ignored as just before Wednesday leaves, Hester whispers in her ear that Augustus Stonehurst was the one responsible for signing the death certificates. Even beyond the fact that Morticia didn't hear this, did she also not see Hester bend over Wednesday's ear to mumble something at her that would strike her curiosity? Or are we going by the logic that if she isn't immediately on screen that she doesn't exist? As for the conversation between Morticia and Hester, Morticia wants to know what she and Wednesday are getting up to, with Hester making the appeal that Wednesday should be free to fly her feathers however she wishes. Yeah, because that went so well for her last season. And Morticia throws it back at Hester that she didn't seem so concerned about interfering when it involved Ophelia 20 years ago. Somehow, the conversation changes topic to the matter involving the Nevermore Gala, as Hester is aware that Morticia has been put in charge, and that Morticia knows full well that Hester wouldn't cough up a penny for it, vindicating my previous stance that Bianca would have also needed to compel Hester the same way she did Morticia for Dort's plan to even succeed. Hester states that she is willing to make a donation to Nevermore on the condition that Morticia give Wednesday Goody's book, meaning that if Wednesday did win that duel back in episode 3, Hester wouldn't have been in a position to make this deal in the first place. Regardless of that, Morticia sticks true to her principles and throws the book in the fireplace to the duress of Hester, which means another loose end from season 1 has been cast aside so hastily, including the matter of Morning Song and Galpin's culpability involving Tyler. Kinda makes one wonder why you would even have those threads stick around if you were going to cut them before they bared fruit. Back at the stocking stuffing, Ajax pries Bianca as to what is going on with her phone getting blown up in messages. This is going to be a huge nitpick, but if Bianca didn't want someone like Ajax to ask what's going on with her phone, wouldn't she have turned off her ringtone and vibrate so that she could focus on the invitations? Anyhow, Bianca opens to Ajax that it's her mom and that she needs to help her get out of a mess she can't unscramble herself, but can't do so on account of Orloff keeping watch on them. Apparently, his head being in a jar makes it so her siren song can't work on him, So would that mean if someone was wearing a motorcycle helmet, or hell, even have a thin piece of cardboard in front of their face, would that dampen the song too? Ajax decides to help Bianca help her mom by pretending to lose his beanie in front of Orloff to stone him, to the point that he's willing to take point with her the whole way over as well. So his Gorgon gaze can work past him being in a jar, but a siren song can't? Whatever. Eugene and Pugsley want to chip in too, but Bianca sirens them to stay their position. So much for their involvement or feelings on Slurp 2, seeing as this is the last time these two will have a presence regarding episode 4 as well. We cut to Willow Hill, where we get a procession of Fester being questioned by Dr. Fairburn before being properly interred here, and most of the matter involving Fester during his stint at Willow Hill is mainly for comedy and does little in the way to advance the plot. The only thing of any substance is that Fester gets interested in a woman at a cafeteria who he assumes is Lois, but turns out to be Louise, who the two get a romantic fling afterward. And his being in a relationship with this lunch lady will be important for later regarding Willow Hill. Back at the weather vane, psych, nevermore, Agnes spills the deeds to Wednesday about this Augustus Stonehurst, explaining that before he was head doctor at Willow Hill, that he used to be a science teacher at Nevermore, and that at one point, Augustus had his own mental breakdown that he got interred at the same place he had headed. The importance of what Augustus got up to and the amount of time he likely took part in Nevermore and Willow Hill will be very important regarding the avian reveal soon, but I will assure you it will be quite the Rubik's Cube to juggle. Meanwhile, in all of this, Enid is having her lunch break with her pack and tries to invite Wednesday over, but Wednesday is too preoccupied with this investigation to bother. This fixation causes Enid to confront Wednesday that she seems more interested in hanging out with Agnes more than Enid, Wednesday trying to once again reverse Uno card that back on Enid regarding her wolf pack. It should be more than clear to Wednesday at this point that not telling Enid she's trying to save her life is causing problems between them more so than doing, so I don't know why Wednesday is trying to bite back if she's trying to show concern for Enid as best as she can muster. Speaking of, the avian makes a more blatant attack on Nevermore, or Wednesday, who the fuck knows, as they call their crows to attack the quad. Wednesday and Enid take cover before Dirk comes in and fireballs a few crows here and there. The one-eyed crow makes an attempt to kidnap Thing at one point, but Dort also manages to whisk a fireball in a way that the crow gives up on their kidnappee, while a procession of Thing's survivability is played up for dramatic tension, despite the fact that he's a fucking hand and not a full-bodied person. Wednesday manages to take notice of the avian, who had been spawning inside of one of the buildings, and immediately gives chase to them, eventually losing them between a secret doorway with only their cloak as proof. Wednesday's only other option is to go up a stairway into a room as her best guess, only to find Fairburn on a call. Like with Season 1 and her ability to immediately jump to conclusions, she tries to subtly accuse Fairburn of being the avian by implying the cloak belonged to her, despite the fact that Fairburn was literally in a call moments before Wednesday arrived at this room, nonchalant to her presence. As for why Fairburn is here, she was in talks with Miss Capri about planning a musical therapy session at Willow Hill, which yet again will be important for the other nonsense that occurs at Willow Hill later, before Miss Capri herself makes an appearance in rushed and out-of-breath fashion. Once again, Wednesday suspects Miss Capri on account of her being out of breath, which while may make an amount of sense given Wednesday giving chase, but Wednesday herself isn't out of breath by the time she gets to Fairburn at this very room, so not sure if that's compelling evidence. Yes, I did say that I suspected that Miss Capri and or Fairburn as being potential antagonists down the line, but whether Wednesday herself has the means to deduce that is of course questionable at best. Cutting back to Police HQ, Santiago continues to press Gabrielle as to what she was doing in that room, while Gabrielle continues to give them the silent treatment, before Bianca and Ajax waltz in to bail her out by way of Bianca siren-songing the two of them out of prodding further. Yet again, wouldn't she need to siren every cop in this building in order to properly escort Gabrielle out? Because sure, that might work for Santiago and her deputy, but it's not like they were the only cops that saw and took Gabrielle in for questioning, right? More never at back. Wednesday is watching ominously through a window. Fairburn and Judy leave in their car, although it's clear that Wednesday had Thing latch himself onto their car to Willow Hill, similarly to what he did in Season 1 of Episode 2, and made sure that objective was done. As things sketches the ride, Morticia confronts Wednesday as to what had just happened, including her knowing of Fester being interred at Willow Hill, suspecting that Wednesday put him up to this. Wednesday again asserts that she's doing all of this to save Enid, and while Morticia understands the concern Wednesday has in relation to her visions aligning with that crow attack, that Wednesday is only going to make things worse if she doesn't stop. And by fucking God, Morticia couldn't be more right. Even if this is the most thickly laid pin that could be laid on thick the writers have pulled, but we're going to get to that matter too. Fester is still out in Willow Hill doing his best Dr. Evil costume getup before Thing alerts him of what Wednesday discovered about Lois, so Fester shifts his priorities to look for Stonehurst. He asks a security guard who points him the way to Augustus, and confusingly enough, tasks Fester to roll him out to his proper cell. I don't know exactly the protocol when it comes to asylum patients like this, but I imagine that, unless the patient is keen of mind and practically rehabilitated, this wouldn't be happening. Moreover, if this security guard wanted Fester to roll out Stonehurst to his cell, then who was taking care of Stonehurst before Fester came into the picture? Needless to say, Fester asks Stonehurst, or in this case, his bird for info, who gives him some interference before Fester electrocutes the bird to pipe up about what he and Stonehurst know about Lois. All that the bird can muster is a sequence of numbers, and these numbers will be somewhat relevant, but not exactly a mystery as to what they are for later. Cutting back to Wednesday, she goes to Orloff to see if he can recall Augustus Stonehurst, and what he likely got up to at Nevermore. All that Orloff knows is that Stonehurst had a daughter, conveniently he can't remember the name of, and that Stonehurst had built an aviary for her up at Iago Tower. Once more, the presence of this tower being in relation to what Stonehurst did at it will be relevant regarding Slurp and the tale of that Clockwork Heart later, but it does go without saying that this tower suddenly being a factor in Nevermore when it otherwise wasn't causes problems for the general architecture of Nevermore. Odd architecture, if you will. Speaking of confusing architecture, we broach the subplot involving Gabrielle and Bianca as they and Ajax decide to hold Gabrielle in an abandoned classroom in Nevermore. The problem with this classroom being here, however, is that it is apparently right next to and directly behind the fireplace in Weem's office, despite the fact that the office is several meters above the ground level of Nevermore, judging from these two shots in Season 1. Also, said fireplace has some kind of secret button that allows one to travel between it and the abandoned classroom. So was that how Weems was able to cover up Rowan's murder this way? Or did Weems even know this compartment existed? As for the subplot, this is the last time this gets touched on in episode 4, and honestly, probably would have saved me the headache if they hadn't established this classroom being right next to the main office of Nevermore this way. We cut immediately to night at Willow Hill as Fester proceeds to escort Gus to his cell, passing right by Laurel, who immediately knows him as being an Adams upon doing so. This revelation by Laurel will be important, far more than you could possibly fucking know, so keep a pin on that for later. As Fester continues to walk by, Stonehurst does weakly point Fester to some maintenance access door in regards to Lois as his clue, oddly candid about telling Fester this information once we do discover what or who Lois really is. Also, despite Fester being tasked to take Stonehurst to his cell and tuck him in, he nevertheless has to sneak around the facility as opposed to nonchalantly walking to what the security guards assume is his own cell, and it will get more confusing the behavior of the guards towards Fester later. As for Laurel, she and Fairburn yet again are in discussion about trying to rehabilitate Tyler as Fairburn doubts Laurel's credentials on account of Tyler attempting to kill her. Laurel states that Tyler only assumed she had abandoned him, and that if he were to, as being a Hyde, he would seal his own doom. So that begs a question of how a Hyde can even stay alive before being given their own master, unless that was the reason his mother died. Oh, won't that somehow get relitigated too, seeing as I still doubt Wednesday's account of things back in Season 1. Fairburn clearly isn't playing Laurel's game of trying to wrestle control of Tyler her way, to which Laurel yet again attempts to make a deal with Fairburn, as she knows who Fester is, and that Wednesday may have something to do with his presence here. Also, this is the first major example of what I alluded back in episode 1 of Season 2 of a scene where it cuts away before the conversation has finished, as we do not get to see the condition of this deal or whether Fairburn accepted it. Adding to that point, Fester makes an attempt to get into the maintenance store but gets accosted by Fairburn and some guards who knock him silly and put him in a cell along with Slurp in attendance too. Okay, so assuming that Fester was put at Willow Hill under false pretense here, why are Fairburn and the guards not kicking him out of Willow Hill then? And assuming they do believe that Fester was acting out of line here, why hadn't he a cell of his own past this point, or his own straitjacket to restrain him earlier? We don't know what Laurel told Fairburn about him, or how they discovered him doing this either, so we can't just assume that Fairburn went with Laurel's plan, and that will be proven thusly soon too, or that they had the intuition to know he would be trying to break in at this moment. Also, the importance of Slurp being in the same cell as Fester will compound several more problems with the plot of Wednesday Season 2, as well as the culpability of his actions on not only Wednesday, but Fester too. Thing also happened to see Fester being held up at this cell, and ran his sorry ass all the way back to Ophelia Hall to warn Wednesday of this. Given he had to catch a ride to get to Willow Hill in the first place, and that this is still being taking place at night, I don't know how he managed to arrive on such short notice. And while yes, we don't see how he got back to Nevermore when he lost track of Rowan back in Season 1, but with that cut, at least we could assume an amount of time has passed between it. Wednesday has Thing go scurry his way back to Willow Hill, the sad sap, as she devises a break-in plan of sorts regarding Willow Hill. Wednesday uses Miss Capri's music session as a window for her to get into Willow Hill by way of stowing herself in her car when she arrives. Agnes is pinnacle in distracting the guard in such a way as to allow Wednesday access, and she'll meet up with Fester's contact via Luis, who will let her ride on in to go free Fester and then beeline to that maintenance store to uncover Lois. Most of the circumstances of this plan are fortuitous in that Fester managed to have someone fawn over him that they'd be willing to break him out, and that Miss Capri's music session is a perfect fog over the whole affair. When again, a more simple and less risky plan could have simply involved Wednesday wanting to meet Fester in his cell, or even volunteer to assist Miss Capri in the music session. But I guess we just have to assume that Wednesday is excommunicado from Willow Hill past this point. As for Enid, she is yet again feeling left out of this and wants to know if Wednesday has her involved in some way. Wednesday is early stunned for a response, getting a particularly venomous line from Enid about whether Wednesday even wants to be her friend anymore. While I do understand the hostility Enid has about this, but is it that Enid is jealous of Agnes more so than actually feeling left out of everything? I guess Enid somehow managed to adopt the worst characteristics about Wednesday between seasons. Wednesday does improvise a role for Enid as simply a lookout if things get hairy by way of making an anonymous tip to Sheriff Santiago, a role that comes to Enid as not befitting her station but regardless takes. We cut to Miss Capri hurriedly getting into her car while she is blissfully unaware of Wednesday stowing herself in her trunk or noticing the sudden increase of weight off the back end. Guess some things never do change between seasons, do they? Also, despite Wednesday having taken the whole ride to Willow Hill, somehow, Agnes and Enid are already at the front gate before Miss Capri arrives, unless I'm to believe that they walked the whole way there prior to it, which calls into greater question as to why Wednesday didn't simply do the same and hide around the car then. Agnes springs into action by getting one of the guards to open the door upon the sound of a knock so that she can invisibly sneak her way inside. Once Miss Capri arrives at the gates, Agnes puts some TNT underneath the toilet and prepares to light the fuses of the TNT at the opportune time the guard goes to check Miss Capri's trunk for anything. So, bear in mind, if Agnes was a few seconds too late to light the match or too early, Wednesday would have immediately been had by this guard. Worse yet, when the guard does open the trunk, doesn't instinctually look down and just keeps his head stationary the whole time he's opening the trunk, just to buy any amount of suspension of disbelief this scene wants you to think it has. Also, once the TNT does go off and the guards are initially distracted, Wednesday does opt to get out of the trunk and scurry around the side of the car, meaning that they could have had the guard inspect the trunk as usual, blow up the bathroom, then had Wednesday quickly strut her way to the side of it while they were caught up in the commotion without needing her to smuggle herself in the trunk. Once Wednesday does approach one of the exits, Louise does assist her into getting inside the facility and stow her beneath her dining tray as they roll out past Miss Capri and Fairburn. who the former does her music therapy session with a piano cover of Zombie by the Cranberries. Not exactly the most uplifting song for her to play, as though the only reason this song was chosen was because it had the word zombie in it, much like how that Creedence Clearwater Revival song was only chosen because it had the phrase Bad Moon in it too. While I wasn't much of a stickler for the choice of music presented in Wednesday Season 1, Season 2 has about double the song covers and double the copyrighted music used herein, so I'm going to be much more critical of it when it's used and how it's used throughout. Wednesday pilfers a guard's keycard while Luis distracts him before they arrive at Fester's cell. Wednesday unlocks the cell and unlocks Fester from his restraints, completely unfazed by Slurp being there and trying to get at her, a detail I honestly like from her to do this. Unfortunately, maybe it would have behooved Wednesday to have been somewhat fazed by Slurp, as, once she has Fester freed, they immediately leave the cell completely wide open for Slurp to escape, as apparently this facility has keycards and all kinds of advanced technology, yet apparently their bars and chains are made out of silly putty for Slurp to simply get out of with enough force against it. You could try to chalk this as Wednesday and Fester being unconcerned about Slurp escaping, but assuming that Wednesday wants to leave as little of a trace of them escaping as possible, wouldn't Wednesday and or Fester had reclosed this cell door so as not to arouse suspicion? And we're going to see just how much of a butterfly effect Slurp having escaped his cell will hold, as we cut to Laurel being escorted to her cell, much to her frustration that only she knows how to get into Tyler's head. So I guess we have to assume from her attitude that Fairburn not only didn't make the deal, but likely made Laurel believe she had agreed to the deal just to come more info about Fester too? But Laurel won't have to worry about what the rest of her sorry life will be, as Slurp inexplicably jumps in and kills one of the guards, distracting the other far enough for Laurel to make her escape. Yes, folks, this motherfucking zombie, having escaped by Wednesday's own negligence, cost the life of a guard, and let a two-time murderer and mastermind manage to escape. And you know what's even more ridiculous? A bunch more guards come running in to restrain Slurp, completely unawares to the fact that Laurel is on the loose as they run right past her and right past Wednesday and Fester too, who the two share a callous glance before they go about their separate ways. Where to even begin with this bullshit? So Slurp killing that guard was enough of a panic to divert all attention from the guards to him, not finding it a bit peculiar that Fester and Laurel are out and about, and that this random teenage girl is along for the ride? Furthermore, how did Wednesday and Fester run in such a direction as to potentially cross paths with Slurp this way? If they had gone the same direction, it would have been utterly impossible for them to cross, and if they went opposite ways, means that Wednesday and Fester were running in circles even more so than Slurp was when he's a fucking zombie. I mean, look at this. There is a guard clearly behind where Fester and Wednesday were running and is just about to pass Laurel here. Was this guard chasing after Fester before he wanted to change priority to Slurp? Miss Capri gets more into the music as the mania starts to ensue, and somehow her piano can make some violin notes in the midst of that, so good going on the consistency of the cover there, sound designers. And you're just going to have to take my word for it, as a clip of it would likely be too much for YouTube to even accept. Alarm bells ring just as the music crescendos, and Fairburn gets words that Slurp is on the loose, neglecting to mention that Laurel and Fester are also on the loose too. Fairburn wants the residents to get outside, but personally escorts Stonehurst away from the commotion, and her being with Stonehurst this way will also crescendo to the final scene of the episode. Wednesday and Fester arrive at the maintenance door, with Wednesday attempting to use the keycard she swiped to gain access. This fails, and Fester has to input the sequence of numbers that parrot gave him to warrant access. The room initially looks like an average maintenance closet, but Wednesday notices some scuff marks on the floor and rightfully assumes the shelves are a hidden doorway to something. As they open it, Wednesday and Fester discover that Lois is not a name, but in fact an acronym for some kind of program involving outcasts. We can also discuss the architectural makeup of this underground facility in relation to Willow Hill in a moment, as I imagine the onboard power to keep the lights on and whatever doodads are inside would make Fairburn and others speculate. But of course, you're likely assuming Fairburn already knows the construction of this facility, and yeah, we can get to that in a moment. Wednesday turns on the power and looks into each of the cells, discovering that most, if not all, of the people held here are the same ones who had obituaries writ for them, so their deaths were faked by Stonehurst to be experimented upon. Wednesday makes a huge reach that the reason Galpin was investigating this was that he feared his son was going to become a victim of the lowest program too, a line of logic that will be contradicted regarding episode 5 later, but can already be contradicted now, seeing as Stonehurst is little more than a vegetable to authorize Tyler's death certificate. Inside of one of these cells, Wednesday takes notice of a woman who is sulking in the corner of her cell, who upon realizing that Wednesday sees her, is curious if they are here to kill her. Of course, Wednesday says no, and the importance of who this woman is will all be laid regarding episode 5, but is nevertheless extremely lucky for Wednesday to have ran into this woman in particular. Before Wednesday and Fester can surmise what to do with these prisoners, a cawing can be heard afar, and to their dismay, the avian has them cornered from the other side, gun in hand. Wednesday assumes this avian to be Fairburn again, despite also assuming Capri was one, and as it turns out, the avian is none other than Judy, Fairburn's assistant. I mean, can't say I wasn't surprised, but it's the kind of surprise that makes one immediately disappointed from the outcome. It would be the same amount of surprise and disappointment if it turned out that Santiago was the avian, because there wasn't any amount of subtext or foreshadowing to put suspicions onto her, unlike with Thornhill being Laurel back in season 1. Now, there's going to be a lot to discuss about Judy's motivations in relation to her father, as she is, of course, Augustus Stonehurst's daughter, who had worked as a team to extract outcast powers and make them their own. But we need to have Judy do her villain monologue before I do so. Judy asserts that Fairburn works for her, not the other way around, as a public face of Willow Hill while continuing the legacy that her father carried out. This extended to Judy herself being made a willing volunteer of this experiment to implant normies with outcast abilities, which succeeded with her gaining those avian powers. Augustus unfortunately got the bad end of that experiment, as he had lost his mind in his attempt to extract these powers, and now we can discuss all the nuance and nonsense regarding this whole plan. Starting off, Orloff said in episode 2 that the last avian that had been at Nevermore was 10 years ago, so if we assume that this avian was Judy, means that the amount of time does not co-align with several outcast patients being made a part of the lowest program as far back as 15 years ago. Although, even with Orloff's hazy memory of things, I imagine he would have made the distinction that this avian who was at Nevermore is not the same person who was Augustus Stonehurst's daughter this way. As for what Augustus got up to, we have to assume that the construction of the lowest program only came to be after he headed it, and not while he was a teacher at Nevermore, even if Judy having an aviary at Nevermore was thematically convenient for her to gain powers in tune with birds. Although, this causes issues with how long Iago Tower had been a part of Nevermore before being decommissioned this way, as well as the nature of one getting access to it, because it's not like Iago Tower is a secret from any which way you look at it. Remember, Enid claims that Iago Tower was shut down after a freak electrical storm, and this storm may yet have something to do with what Slurp got up to while he was still human. And his relation with Stonehurst and Judy will also be established shortly, which also means that Ajax's tale about the Clockwork Heart is actually much more recent than what was initially assumed. As for Judy's motivations and how long she had teamed up with Stonehurst, first off, did Judy go by a different pseudonym as to not have Wednesday pry about who this mystery daughter was? I guess we just have to assume on Judy's part that her name tag when Wednesday first met her didn't have her last name, nor did Fairburn ever refer to her by her last name either. And I guess the security guard who introduced Augustus to Fester also wasn't aware of him having a daughter as well, despite the fact that Judy would have no reason to cloak her relation to Augustus until after killing Bradbury and Galpin. Also, if Augustus was interred at Willow Hill after his experiment backfired, that means that Judy would have had a hand in putting him there and assisting him whenever pertinent. And if we are to assume that Judy made Fairburn the public face of Willow Hill after that, means that, once more, Judy would have no reason to hide her relation to her father, and thus, Wednesday, Galpin, and or Bradbury would have made that connection much sooner than not. I can only assume that Judy had distanced herself from her father as a result of how candid Augustus was about telling Fester where to find the Lois program after twisting his hand a bit. But I'm not sure if Augustus felt guilty about what he did, or that his brain was so cooked that he couldn't tell the difference between a secret and common knowledge. But if that is the end result of Augustus, means that Judy probably should have intervened the moment anyone, especially Fester, wanted to talk to Augustus on the off chance he would have spilt the beans on their grand conspiracy. As for when Judy did start to team up with Stonehurst, I can only assume it happened soon after Augustus headed Willow Hill and when Judy came of age to do so. But as for how long between then and now is another mystery altogether. There is at least a 15-year gap between when the Stonehursts collected these patients and now, although that gap will get much larger when we find out who that mystery woman in the cell is, causing more confusion as to the frequency of these patients being sent here. I'm going to assume that these also stopped by the time Augustus lost his mind, as the obituaries Wednesday reads out don't go any farther than 2021, with Season 2 canonically taking place in 2023. Which calls into question as to why Judy hadn't completely snuffed the Lois program, even with her interest in completing her father's work, if she hadn't been able to collect any for the last 2 years. Lastly, how did Bradbury and Galpin discover the Lois program, or at least the acronym being inexorably tied to these patients? Yes, they were able to collect a number of obituaries of outcast patients tied to Willow Hill, but if they knew that this Lois had a hand in this, wouldn't that steer them towards investigating Willow Hill as a whole? What the fuck was Bradbury out scoping pictures of a couple if they were as close to uncovering the secret of Willow Hill as they were? Why was Galpin out drinking his sorrows away and not prodding information about and within Willow Hill? If anything, they likely wouldn't know about the Lois program given what information we do get about it, and seems put here as both a red herring and a breadcrumb for Wednesday, and nothing else. Whew! Now we can get into the plot again, if briefly. I'm also not sure why Judy plans to pop a cap in their ass as opposed to killing them with her birds like she did everyone else, unless she didn't want to be a creature of habit. Fester plans to bail Wednesday and him out of this mess by supercharging a huge jolt of electricity such that it blows back Wednesday, Fester, and Judy a few meters back and completely short-circuits the entire facility into a blackout. Fester doing this frankly unnecessary move will once again put onus on him for future casualties along the way. Additionally, because we now know who this avian is and what they are capable of, means that Wednesday was correct in assuming that she was losing her psychic powers and not what I had assumed was a block by those avian powers, even though there would be no intuition for Wednesday to arrive at that conclusion. Enid and Agnes, still on lookout, take notice of the sudden blackout of Willow Hill, and Enid takes this as a sign to call up Sheriff Santiago to assist. But not because of the immediate danger this poses, but that Wednesday happened. Mixed priorities there, Enid, not gonna lie. As a result of the power going out, that somehow trips a switch that opens all the cells at every Willow Hill patient, including the ones outside of the Lois program. Why the fuck would a facility be powered this way, that if a power outage occurs, they would just unleash all the crazies this way? That seems incredibly and needlessly dangerous. Regardless, the Lois patients all run out and dogpile on Judy in what would be some just desserts for her, but unfortunately Judy will survive this going into episode 5. Wednesday and Fester decide this is the moment to get out, but Wednesday goes her separate ways from Fester so that she can assist a woman who wanted to die in her cell, meaning that, once more, Fester has been discarded when the show has expended his usefulness to the show. Yep, can't wait for him to be used like that when and if a Season 3 comes around, and that's a huge if. So the facility is in utter disarray, like a PG version of the prison escape scene in Natural Born Killers. In the commotion, Laurel grabs some kind of key from a dead guard to unbind her chains, and while it is a bit vague as to whether this guard was killed by Slurp or by the other patients, the blood around his head would prove otherwise. So that's another death on Wednesday in Fester's hands, including Pugsley's by proxy. Speaking of, Slurp is still out and about as several more guards helplessly try to shoot him down, and while Slurp does slump his way towards one of them, the scene cuts away before we know whether he ignored them or got another kill on his belt. Laurel runs immediately towards Tyler's cell, which is also wide open, but apparently Tyler didn't feel of import to break himself out until narratively expedient for Laurel to herself. She helps Tyler out of his binds and his collar, pleading again that she could never abandon him. Tyler, unfortunately, doesn't feel the same way, making the assumption that Laurel was the reason he was locked away here. Laurel bargains with Tyler that Destiny gave them a second chance to get their revenge on Wednesday, as opposed to Outcast as a whole. Also, Wednesday gave you a second chance to get revenge on Wednesday, the stupid tard she is. Tyler insists that he'll take care of Wednesday on his lonesome in a manner that I hope would be guaranteed to be fatal as opposed to not, but we can get to that when it happens. Laurel tries to plead mercy on Tyler, and Tyler's version of mercy is to give her a 5-second head start to run away from him before he properly hides out. Laurel, the criminal mastermind that she is, takes lessons from the Prometheus school of running away from things and runs in a straight line from Tyler, who predictably catches up to her and properly kills her his way. I mean, if the show only brought Laurel back for season 2 only to be killed the moment they revealed her in episode 3, they might as well just had Tyler break himself out of his clutches, as he would be more than capable of achieving, and is yet another loose end that is cut short from the tip. A bunch of Willow Hill patients run manically outside with Fester giving his own goodbyes to Louise, who doesn't seem perturbed that she let out a bunch of crazies when her only reason to involve herself was to free Fester from his cell, but given this is the last time we'll see her, I guess it's not worth discussing. Although, it is worth discussing Fester and by extension, Wednesday's culpability in sabotaging this entire facility in the manner that they do, on top of their culpability in the people who get killed in the collateral, including Laurel no less. Yes, I know that I'm saying that for Laurel, but having her get incidentally killed by who she tried to control is less of a justice than her serving her time for what she did to him and what she had planned to do. Fairburn escorts Stonehurst in her personal office away from the chaos, trying helplessly to call for any assistance on the phone. She hears some noise and arms herself, only to be jumped and killed by Slurp. So much for her involvement in not only this show, but likely what Judy got up to. So the only thing I can take pleasure in this is that Wednesday, Pugsley, and Fester are also responsible for killing Fairburn, and is something the show will not acknowledge when convenient. And whatever bullshit this show will try to retcon that Fairburn somehow knew full well about the Lowe's program does not excuse killing her this way, or the blatant negligence of the protagonist we are supposed to root for. As for poor Stonehurst, Slurp for the first time has some words of cohesion for him, referring to Stonehurst as old friend before eating him too. What is that now? 6 people that Pugsley killed by reviving him and abetting him? Well, that's not fair. Pugsley couldn't have stopped Slurp here anyway.
Fuck. Hold on, bitch.
Yes, Slurp by the end of episode 3 is completely out of Pugsley's hands. But Slurp wouldn't be at Willow Hill if not for Pugsley bringing him along at that camping trip, as opposed to securing him somewhere he couldn't hurt other people. And his means to kill Fairburn, Stonehurst, and those 2 guards are also on Wednesday and Fester for not closing the cell door, even if that same cell door would have inexplicably opened because of a power outage of all things. Do keep what Slurp says to Stonehurst in mind, as that also means that Slurp was alive when they were around. Anyhow, Wednesday quietly escorts the mystery woman around the corridor before she is taken aback by seeing Tyler in his hide form from across the corridor. She has the mystery woman flee as she confronts her fate with Tyler by just standing idly at the end of the corridor. Tyler stops short of tackling her, and there is a number of things Tyler could do to kill Wednesday at this very moment. And do you want to take a wild guess as to what he doesn't do? He doesn't slash her, stab her with his claw. Nope, he just throws her out of the building, a move that can add plausible deniability to Wednesday surviving this. And while yes, Wednesday can't possibly die with the existence of the next 4 episodes, but if we are to assume Tyler does want to kill Wednesday right fucking now, he wouldn't do this. So once more, Wednesday has incredible luck on her side. Adding on to the luck Wednesday has, even if Tyler wanted to make sure he confirmed the kill, a bunch of cop cars come and riddle Tyler with bullets such that he has to flee the scene before Santiago calls for an ambulance for Wednesday. The episode ends with Wednesday monologuing that Morticia was right, that she did, in fact, make everything much worse. Whether that was by extension of leaving Slurp to his own devices, having Fester give Laurel means to allow Tyler to escape, but as far as I'm concerned, Wednesday may only be saying this in regards to Tyler trying to kill her and being on the loose. Because how could the show even account for just how badly she made things for everyone around her? And finally, that was the end of episode 4. I know it's a bit late to say this, but it should go without saying that this episode uniquely does not have a school flavor of the day, but I imagine if it did, it would be incredibly contrived to fit whatever hairballed scheme Wednesday did to break into Willow Hill. Beyond the surprising yet disappointing reveal of the avian, the labyrinthian means to square the motivations of Judy and her father, characters saying more contradictory things while having contradictory motivations, and everything to do with Willow Hill as a plot beat and setting, episode 4 was quite the juggernaut of awfulness for me to unpack. I won't count my blessings, but I surely hope episode 5 will try to ground itself a bit more, but we'll just have to save that analysis for part 3 of this series.